I want to first of all just walk you through where you find your data. And the only reason I'm doing that is because if you have your data with you as we go through this, it'll help you to be able um, to follow along. So I'm going to just share my screen really quickly. Hold on just a moment. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura Lee Gillespie. I work at the State Board of Education. I'm the program support coordinator. And if you look at my screen, I'm pretty sure it's showing UPIPs. Is that correct? Okay, I'm seeing heads nod. You want to go on to UPIPs and go to document storage. And in document storage, you should have a USBE folder. And in that folder, you should have one called data. You'll click on the plus sign next to data, and you'll see this one is an LEA that has several years, but you are looking for the year 25-26 data literacy materials. And if you look in here, you'll see there are several different reports that we're going to be using today. So if you have a need or need help, you can get in the chat. We'll try to help you, but that is where you're going to find your reports to be used today. And then Susan has a great deal of resources that will help in the process. But just as a reminder, for those who don't know where to find your reports, document storage, USBE folders, data is where you're going to find them. Any questions on that? I do not have a 25-26 folder. Okay, Julicia, you are at, I always get it backwards, leadership learning.
Academy. Oh,
Yes,
darn it.
we will figure that out and make sure that it's in there. Okay. If there's anyone else, please feel free to add it to the chat and we will be happy to make sure you have access. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Susan, to get us started because we've got lots to focus on today.
We do indeed. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, let's go for it. I'm Susan Wagner. I'm president of Data Driven Enterprises, a consulting company based in Denver, Colorado, and I consult with state departments of education and school districts across the country, including Utah. And I consult around the areas of data analysis, program evaluations, special education issues. And I'm a long-term consultant with Utah's State Board of Education. I'm happy to be here today. I need all of you to get in a data frame of mind. And the question is, can there be such a thing as too much data? From my perspective, I've never met a report I didn't like to generate, a statistic I didn't like to calculate, or a trend I didn't like to analyze. However, maybe I shouldn't have generated all those reports, analyzed all those statistics, or reviewed all those trends. So the data dilemma is distinguishing between what is interesting and what is important. So what is interesting and what is important? The analysis and presentation of the data should not be the end goal in and of itself. It should have a purpose. So we're going to be looking at lots of data over the next 4 hours, and we're going to have a fun time. It's going to be interesting, but we don't want it to end there. We do want this to have a purpose and that you will go back to your LEA and act on your data. So keep that in mind as we go through the day. When presented with an overwhelming amount of data, it's helpful to answer 3 questions: what, so what, and now what? To harness the power of data, one must go beyond the data gathering, the what, and focus on articulating the so what and the now what of the gathered data. So in terms of what, oops, I'm missing one of my boxes here. So the what is, we have lots of data on students with disabilities that we'll be going over today. Then the so what is, why is this data important? What insights can I glean from the data? And then the now what is what happens next with the data and my insights? What are my next steps? So we're going to keep this framework in mind as we go through the day. My mission is to present enough information without going overboard to allow each of you to have an aha moment, a moment of sudden realization, inspiration, insight, recognition, or comprehension. So you say, aha, that's what I need to focus on when I return to my LEA, or aha, that's what that means. Okay, I'm going to show you an optical illusion in the next slide. You had a sneak peek already. And I want you to take about 10 seconds to look at it and think about what it is you see. Ready? Some of you may have seen this before, but how many of you saw some purple cocoon-shaped objects at first? You know, that's what I initially saw. That's what most people see. And then suddenly it clicks. You realize it's forks. So you can see the fork tines up here. So it's forks laying on a towel, a purple towel. So we have the purple cocoon shaped things and the fork. So it's the same image, but different interpretation. And that's the trap we fall into with data. We think we're seeing what's there, but we're really just seeing our first, easiest interpretation. Insight only shows up if you push back that first impression. So the risk isn't that we don't have data. The risk is that we stop at the first thing we think we see. So today I'm really going to be pushing you to dig deeper into the data. And then definitely when you go back to your LEAs, we want you to dig even deeper. So I have my mission for that aha moment, but I also have a few objectives today. And they are to give context for the data reports, describe their purpose, provide an overview, demonstrate the type of data in the reports, point out curiosities in the data that USBE and I came up with from looking at the data reports ahead of time. And then we want to briefly discuss next steps. So the report context. Reports on students with disabilities have been generated for the state and for each LEA. And these reports include information regarding students with disabilities, their identification rate, their characteristics, their primary disabilities, attendance rates, LRE, suspension, participation, proficiency, graduation, and dropout rates. As I told you, we have lots of data to go through today. And these reports show 24-25 data, as well as data from up to the 4 previous years. The purpose of these reports, keeping in mind the what, so what, now what, are for LEAs to examine, look, compare, and determine. So you're going to be examining those report categories, their characteristics, attendance rates, suspension rates, etc. Then we want you to look for patterns, trends, and associations among the data elements of the various reports to start to make sense of the data. We also want you to compare your data to the state data. So on all your reports, you have your rates, and then you usually have a black diamond that signifies the state rate. So you can easily compare how you are performing versus the state as a whole. And then depending on what you discover in your examination process, we want you to determine if the data suggests that some action needs to take place. So I'm going to keep driving home that point. We want you to take action on this data. So by examining, looking, and comparing, you will begin to answer questions like, do we need to change our identification processes? Do we need changes in our eligibility procedures? Could we improve our attendance rates or our suspension rates? Could some students with disabilities be moved to a less restrictive environment? Are there some students who could be performing higher on the state test? Or could some of our students be graduating with a regular diploma who currently aren't? So those are the types of questions we want you to start asking yourself based on the data. Now, you can't determine definitively if any of the answers to these questions are yes. That would require additional digging into data back at your LEA, additional discussions with your staff, parents, etc. But we do want you to think about, based on our initial answers to these questions, should we be coming up with some action items based on our review? All right, we're going to be using a Padlet to facilitate this discussion. So let me put the Padlet in the chat. So click on that link and you should be taken to a Padlet. If that link's not working, holler, I'll do it again. But you should end up in a place that looks like this. Is everyone there? I don't hear anyone saying they're not there, so I'm going to assume you're all there. So
Yeah.
let me walk you through this Padlet.
It's working.
Great, thanks, Laura. Okay, about us. Here's me. Here's Laura. I get a whole paragraph. Laura gets a line. But just know that Laura is my partner in this. I appreciate her setting this up and helping out with this process. So we are partners on this. In the overview section, there is a PDF of my PowerPoint. I encourage you to download it. So I'll be going over lots of data somewhat quickly. And so if you have the PowerPoint on your second screen, you can look at the data more closely. Plus, I know there has to be at least one person in the audience who just wants to know how many slides is this lady going to be going over? 107. It's a lot, I know. Then we have some report overviews. And so these list out all of the reports that have been generated for your LEA. And so we're not going to go over all these reports. You can see how many reports they are, but I want to point out a couple things. So for the indicator reports, the reports are named and have footers that refer to the indicator number. So graduation are all your report one. So you have a big picture one, a snapshot one, drill down one. They all have to do with graduation. Indicator two, big picture two, snapshot two, drill down two, all have to do with dropout. Then you have 3A, participation, 3B, performance on the regular test, etc. Then we also have some what we call topic areas. So they are not indicator specific, but they relate to indicators. They help you to understand the context and what's unique about your LEA. So we have X1 for identification rate, X2 demographics, attendance, ESY, and demographics for preschool. So as I said, lots of reports, lots of topics to discuss. I'll come back to this infographic in a moment. Then we have a column of statewide reports, and you have a similar set for your LEA. So for graduation, here's the big picture one report I was referring to moments ago. So these big picture reports, if you look at nothing else for the indicators, look at these big picture reports because they really give you a quick understanding of what's going on with your data. It shows current data, it shows results over time, it shows disaggregated data. So you can quickly see, for example, females have a higher graduation rate than males. And then you have additional reports, a snapshot, and drill down reports showing your disaggregated data of 5 years of data. As I said, we're not going to dig deep into the reports themselves, just more of a high level look at the data. Along with each statewide report, we have an activity guide that goes with it. So for indicator 1 and 2, we have an indicator 1 and 2 activity guide. And this is for you to work on back at your LEA. We just don't have time to go through all these activity guides, but it tells you the reports you need for this activity. And then it asks you some very general questions, such as what is your current graduation rate? What is the state rate? What's your general impression? How does your rate compare to the state? How has your rate changed over time? Did you meet the target for this indicator? And then it closes with some key takeaways and next steps. So as I said, it's just a general overview that you can work on with staff back at your LEA to begin to understand your data reports. Then there's a special activity guide just for today's session. It's the first one listed. It's called What, So What, Now What? So there are 9 areas that I'm going to be sharing some charts, some data surrounding everything from identification to ESY. I encourage you to download this and print it out or to move it over to your second screen. And so as we go through each topic area, you can jot down some thoughts. So jot down for identification, what stands out to you? What patterns do you see? And then so what? What are your insights and implications based on what you're looking at? We all know that when you attend a webinar or a training or a workshop, that we're more likely to do something with the data if we physically write something down. And so that's why I encourage you to download this and write a few things down. You don't have to write something down for every area, but hopefully there will be a couple things you write down, and then you can reflect on your now what. What recommendations do you see? What follow-up should I be doing back at my LEA? And then we have some whiteboards. And so we're going to be collecting feedback from you on whiteboard. So let's start with the first one, which just happens to be the easiest one to answer. So click on the whiteboard and it says introduction, name, and LEA organization. Some of you may have used a Padlet before. It's real similar to a Jamboard if you've used that. But in order to write on it, what you do is you go over here on the right-hand side and click on this Post-it. And then you select your color, and then you click on the whiteboard, and then you start typing. I see some of you are already doing it. Perfect. So once again, you click on this Post-it, select a color, click over here, and then you have to start typing right away or it won't work. If you mess up, you just do a right click and you can delete your whiteboard. Unlike Jamboard, it is not possible to delete someone else's Post-it note. So don't worry that you're going to delete something someone else said. But if you find that your Post-it is on top of someone else's, kind of move your Post-it out of the way. Is anyone having trouble getting to the whiteboard and doing a Post-it? Okay, good. I see lots of activity here. So I'll wait another minute or so just for more of you to record your name. I see lots of colors. Good. We have a colorful group. I expect your comments to be just as colorful as we go through the day. All right, you'll notice all the whiteboards over here that we're going to tackle. There's 20 of them. I will orient you to the right whiteboard when the time comes. To get back to the main Padlet, in most browsers, what happens is once you click on a whiteboard, you're in a separate tab, so you can't click back, but this tab should still be open. So once you've done your name, go ahead and click back on this tab. And if anyone has problems, let me know. Or you can just go in the chat and click on that link I gave you to the Padlet. So you should have 2 tabs open. One more thing I wanted to point out to you before I go back to my PowerPoint is this infographic in the overview section. And it's how to use your data reports. And USBE and I came up with this. And so, but
I apologize. There was just an issue, but it's all good. Thank you.
okay. I didn't want your recording to miss anything that I had to say. So this infographic is a really helpful guide on how to use your data reports when you're back at your LEA. So it talks about looking at your annual performance report, identifying a focus area for the coming school year. Maybe you decide to focus on educational environments. Then you would want to find your supporting reports in those data share out folders. Conduct a root cause analysis to determine why this problem area you identified is happening. Develop an action plan and then implement, analyze, and review your progress. So please download this. We don't have time to do a full problem-solving model today, but be sure to circle back to this when you can. And now I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. So we've done that. Here's what I was talking about here. And basically, that infographic is a problem-solving model. You want to identify a problem, determine why it's happening, come up with a plan to tackle it, implement the plan, and then do an evaluation to see how well your plan is working, keeping data right there in the center. All right, we've talked about the reports. So these are all the reports. So I won't be going over all of these reports, but many of them we will be touching on briefly. Now, I won't be going over significant disproportionality. I do want to say I have a 45-minute lecture on significant disproportionality. No one ever asked me to do it, but I throw it out there. There's always a first time. Well, maybe one of these days. We've talked about the activity guides. So let me talk a little bit more about exploring your data reports. When you're looking at the data for a given category, think about these things. What is the current score? And are you pleased with this score? How has the score changed over time? And are you pleased with the current score given the trend? Maybe your score is not as high as you'd like, but the trend is upward, and that's encouraging. What does your disaggregated data tell you? Which groups score the highest, which score the lowest? And lastly, are improvement activities needed for this data point? So I do want to point out that the data in the reports are not official data. So the rates in these reports may vary slightly from official rates. In many cases, they're going to be spot on. They're going to be exactly like their official rates, but sometimes they might vary just by a little bit. And that's just because of how I receive the data and how I analyze the data. So it's not incorrect. It just might be slightly different. Keep that in mind. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the data in these reports are not for public reporting. These reports include rates based on small n sizes. Maybe at your LEA, you have only 3 students with an other health impairment. Well, these reports show how those 3 OHI kids have performed, and you don't want that to get out in the public. So these are for school and LEA use only. All right, I've talked about some of the topic areas we're going to dig into, so let's go ahead and get started with identification rate. A curiosity USBE and I had is, why is the K-12 special education identification rate increasing in Utah? So let me show you the state level data. So you can see in 2015, it was 11.5% of all enrolled K-12 students were identified with special ed. Now it's 13.2%. So not quite a 2 percentage point increase, but you can see each year it's a steady increase. One thing that Laura Lee asked me to do is to show the results by districts versus charters. And so you will see a lot of slides that show that. If we look at the charter school identification rate, so looking across all charter schools, we can see that that rate has increased. Similarly, the rate for districts has increased. So a little higher increase for charter schools than districts, but both show a trend upward. Another thing I'll show on a lot of these slides are the range by LEA. And so that just helps for you to understand the context of yours. So maybe you're a K-12 district, your identification rate is 14%. So it's helpful to look at the state rate to see, are you similar, above, or below? But it's also helpful for you to see the full range of identification rates. So for districts, the range is 8.4% to 19.7%. For charters, it's 0.4% to 29.4%. So none of the ranges I show include the School for the Deaf or Spectrum Academy. As we know, these are very unique LEAs, and they have some extreme values. So I didn't want that to impact any of your interpretation. But what we have here shows that there's at least one district in the state that identifies 8.4% of its students for special ed, another district that identifies 19.7%. And then for charters, one charter that has a 0.4%, very low identification rate, another 29.4%. Now, when you see this, you shouldn't automatically assume that this 29.4% LEA or 19.7% LEA are over-identifying, or that this 8.4 or 0.4 are under-identifying. It could be that given the population, that's exactly the identification rate that should be happening. So this is just one data piece. If you're this 8.4% district, you might go back to your district and say, are we identifying all the kids that we should be? Maybe we should look at our child find procedures just to make sure we're not missing anyone. So that's the purpose in showing these rates, not to say you're doing something wrong. So I hope I make myself clear on that point. All right, so now what we want you to do is go to the Padlet, as well as when I say go to the Padlet, it also means go to your reports. So we're looking at identification rate, and so you can go down and find the state identification rate report, and then you also should have your own identification report in that UPIPS folder. We want you to take a few minutes to look at your identification rate data. And then we want you to comment on the Padlets. Now, for each of our topic areas, we have 2 Padlets. So one is our curiosity. So you can see it here. It's the second whiteboard that asks, why is the K-12 special ed identification rate increasing? We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You can just click on a Post-it and write your response. But the main purpose today is really for you to start looking at your own data. So we'd also love if it's okay if you want to ignore this one and just focus on what do you see in your data and what are your implications based on what you see. If you feel like sharing, you don't have to share, but we'd like to kind of see what some of you are seeing in your own data. So I'm going to give you a few minutes for this. Let's take about 5-10 minutes. But first, are there any questions about your mission? Your mission to look at your identification reports and then comment on one or both of these whiteboards. Any questions, any problems? Okay, well, I'll check in at 1:05 and see if we're ready to come back. Part of my checking in, if I see a lot of activity on here, I'll figure you might be ready to come back. So definitely let me see some activity. Laura Lee, anything else before they go on their own and work on their whiteboards?
No, that sounds great.
Okay, go for it.
Susan, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. I was on a roll. Don't know what happened. All right. I'm not sure how much you heard or didn't hear. Let me start with this slide. So our curiosity is, why are we seeing slight decreases in the percent of students with disabilities with an SLD over time, specific learning disability, and a slight increase in the percent of students with disabilities with an OHI and autism over time? And I'll show you a chart about that. All right, this chart shows the percentage of students with disabilities with a given disability. So 40% of students with disabilities have a specific learning disability, 25% have a communication disorder or speech language impairment, followed by 12% other health impairment and 10% autism. And you can see the other categories. And these are rounded, so 0%. There's actually more than 0% with a hearing impairment. It's just due to rounding. This is the slide that shows the charters versus districts. And in general, you're pretty similar. There are some differences. So there's a higher percentage of students with disabilities with autism in the charters than districts. So 14.3% of students with disabilities in charter schools are identified with autism. 9.6% of students with disabilities in districts are identified with autism. And then the other biggest increase, I guess, would be the other category. So everything besides autism, ED, BD, ED, CD, etc. They're more likely to be in a district. So this would be TBI, visual impairment, hearing impairment, things like that. And then in terms of SLD, students with disabilities are more likely to be identified with an SLD in districts than in charters. If we look at the range for just the SLD category, what this shows is for districts, it ranges from 24.4% to 64.9%. Charters 13.3 to 69.1. These are huge ranges, which are real interesting. The statistician in me wants to dig down further. So what this says is there's a district that identifies 64.9% of its students with disabilities with a specific learning disabilities. Another one identifies 24.4% of their students with an SLD, and a similar range for charters. So once again, that doesn't necessarily mean anyone's doing something wrong. It's just curious. This shows the results over time in the percentage of students with a given disability. By the way, when you look at your own data, you would go to this report, drill down report X2B. I'll point it out in a minute. You don't have the graphs, but you have the tables of numbers. So if we look for grades 3 to 5, we can see that the lines are generally flat, although we see a slight decrease in the SLD category. We see a slight increase in the OHI category and very slight increase in students with autism. If we go to grades 6 through 8, we see some of these same patterns, although to a higher degree. So we see a decrease for SLD, increase in OHI, increase in autism. And 9-12, similar pattern to what we saw in 6-8. Decrease in the percentage of kids identified with SLD, increase in OHI, increase in autism. So what we're going to do now, let me get the Padlet over here. So the report we're looking at now is this X2 demographics. And so it starts off with a snapshot. And then here's the data over time. And so the report I was talking about that shows it by grade level starts right here, grade K through 2 only. You can see the disability changes because often disability is somewhat correlated with grade level. Kids at the earlier grades more likely to be speech language, communication disorder. Kids at the older grades more likely to have an SLD, for example. So you'll want to look at your own reports there. And in terms of the whiteboards, if you go to number 4, here's our curiosity. Why are we seeing slight decreases in SLD over time? Why are we seeing slight increases in OHI and autism over time? We'd love to get your feedback on this. And then slide 5 or whiteboard 5 is for you to reflect on your own data surrounding disability categories. Any questions before I turn you loose? Okay, well, let's take about 8 minutes. I'll check in 8 minutes and go ahead and look at your reports. I see a lot of good responses on this first whiteboard. Feel free to record what you're seeing in your own data over here if you'd like to share. Let's take about 3 more minutes to do that. Let's take 1 more minute to finish up your thoughts. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. Just like with identification, you didn't hear me say this since I was on mute, but just like with identification, you've made some great comments and made some good hypotheses as to why we're seeing what we're seeing in the data. Anyone from USBE want to comment on any of these comments, post-its? Not required. Just want to make sure I give someone besides me a chance to speak up. This is not the Susie show. It's the everyone involved show.
Susie, I don't have a specific comment about the comments here. I mean, there's a lot of really good, interesting thoughts. I do have a comment for those who are in the chat. You should make sure you're in the folder that's the 2025-2026 data literacy materials. And either Emily Nordfelt or I or Ellen McLaughlin can help you through a direct chat if you need help.
Okay. Yes, we want to make sure that you do have your access to your reports. Okay, well, let's continue on here. And let's talk about attendance rates. So the chronic absenteeism rate has plateaued at about 30%. What factors are sustaining this level of chronic absenteeism? That's our curiosity. Let me show you the data. So this chart here shows the percentage of students with disabilities with a given attendance rate over time. So we didn't go back to 1920 or 2021 because the COVID impacts, but the last 4 years data has been somewhat steady. So this shows, for example, in 21-22, 44.4% of students with disabilities had a high attendance rate. So they were attending 95% or higher. Most recently is 46.2%. So this has increased, which is good. This orange line is the percentage of kids with chronic absenteeism. That means that they're missing 10% or more of the school year. And so it was at 31.9% in 21-22. Most recently, it's at 29.1. So it has decreased, which is good. But if we look at this over time, it's, pretty flat around 30%. And of course, 1 out of 3 kids almost having chronic absenteeism, I'm sure we'd all agree that is higher than what we'd like. If we look at the results by district and charter, it's real similar except for this end year. So for whatever reason, in 23-24, 29.1% of students with disabilities at charter schools were chronically absent, and this increased to 32.1%. Whereas for districts, it decreased slightly from 29.2 to 28.6%. We see wide variability in chronic absenteeism rates by LEA type. So for districts, it ranges from 16.4%. So there's one district that has a really low chronic absenteeism rate, which is great. There's also one charter school that has a very low chronic absenteeism rate. Only 1.1% of their kids are chronically absent. But then we do have some LEAs with very high chronic absenteeism rates. So one district, 52%, more than half of their students with disabilities are chronically absent, and a charter where over 83% of their students with disabilities are chronically absent. And so that is a big curiosity. We can also look at the data by subgroups to see, are there particular subgroups that are more likely to be chronically absent than others? And so we can see by race ethnicity, Native Americans are more likely than the other groups, followed by Hispanics are the next group who has high chronic absenteeism. If we look at it by disability category, we can see our BD, behavioral disorder, or ED group, 41% of them are chronically absent, followed by kids with SLD and then OHI. For environment, kids placed in the V2 environment, they're more likely to be chronically absent than kids in the V1 environment. This is interesting by grade. So I do this type of analysis for several states. And in Utah, there's not big differences by grade level. In other states, we're more likely to see this grade 6 and 8 bar spike. So I don't know what you're doing in your middle schools, but it's working because I don't see that spike at the middle school grades. So if we look at the reports, let's go back now. So the reports you'll want to look at are the X3 attendance reports. And lots of reports to look at here, 17 pages. You don't need to look at all of them, of course, but we show the big picture for high attendance. I focused on chronic absenteeism, and that is, if you keep going, it is X3C report, chronic absence report on page 9. So, and it just shows the data points I was going over. And then you also get to a drill down report that shows the attendance rates over time. So that's the report you want to look at. In terms of the whiteboards, if you click on number 6, it asks about the chronic absenteeism rate and why does it appear to be leveling out. And then we have your what, so what when you look at your LEA level reports. So any questions before I turn you loose on this? Okay, so I'll give you once again about 8-10 minutes. Go ahead and look at the data and start making some comments. Thank you. Let's take 2 more minutes to record your thoughts. Okay, I have a couple questions for you. So we have fewer comments on this one than we did our previous two curiosities. And I'm not seeing anyone write on the what so what. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you what you need. Am I giving you enough time to look at your reports, to reflect on the data? Do you need more time? Or you're just writing it down for yourself? You don't want to share, which is fine. But, I do want to make sure I get input that if I need to make an adjustment, I certainly can make an adjustment. This session is about all of you having an opportunity to look and reflect on your data. So if I need to change what I'm doing in terms of time allotment or whatever else, I want to make sure I do that. So Laura Lee, anyone from USBE or any of you LEAs want to speak up and give me some guidance if I need to change course here?
I just see one in the chat about personally had an interruption that needed to be addressed. I think maybe a little more time might be
Okay.
helpful. Any
Yeah.
other thoughts from anyone? No
Okay,
more
I will do
time.
that. All right, but please feel free to speak up if I need to make an adjustment. I tend to be a master and want to get everything done in the allotted time. We don't need to get through all 9 areas. So I'll make sure I slow it down. But great comments in terms of attendance and what might be going on. Yes, COVID really had an impact on a lot of things, and attendance definitely was one of those. So, any any comments about attendance?
I just think attendance is a little bit harder of a subject to attack. Um, and I think it's just a harder one. I think it involves a lot more digging to get down to the root causes of things. So I don't know if it's something that can be solved here in this amount of time. And I think it may be a little more problem solving, looking at more outside things than just right here.
Really doing that root cause analysis back at the LEA. Good point, Becky.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say I was so surprised this comment didn't get brought up. Um, I have observed in my years of working in special education, some principals, instead of appropriately addressing behavior needs that arise for students with disabilities, they make parent phone calls home and just say, "Hey, Johnny's having a bad day. Can you come pick up this student?" And then they're removed from the school without proper documentation. So you're not really getting a better picture. So it's just one of those things to be mindful of as a special education administrator. I think to have a practice in place of, at least a case manager, paying attention to disability, absenteeism to see if there is a pattern of that going on at any school that needs to be addressed in a different way. And then I also have had students in the past who, especially like in the secondary setting, when they have a non-preferred subject coming up, they would text or call mom to come pick them up. And so they would have a high absent pattern from classes that they did not prefer. So it's just something that you can, address with the parent and bring up the concerns with the parent, how it's really hard to make progress in IEP goals when the parent is, picking up the student and removing them from their specialized instruction.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, someone commented attendance is often a parent problem. So that relates to your last comment. And in terms of your first one about, for example, schools calling a parent, hey, so-and-so is having a bad day, can you come pick them up? OSEP a couple of years ago called that out and named that as an informal removal and said you have to pay attention to those. Those really are suspensions if you are, making the parent come and get them. So good insight into what's going on with attendance. Any other
Susan,
comments?
Susan, I would be curious just from the LEAs that are on the call, has anyone found success in engaging those parents? Attendance is often a parent problem. That one's sticking out to me as well, but and also family engagement. Any successful tips that you can provide to any of us to think about?
I have this right now with a student. They go home every afternoon. Mom teaches gymnastics in the morning. By 12:30, that child wants to be home because mom's home with the little ones. And so I've really had to, like, I called mom and said, this needs to stop. Like, he's missing his schoolwork. And she's like, oh, I didn't even think of it as that. And so like I just had to like grab the bull by the horn and be like, he's got to be in school. So
Great point, Mickey. Thank you.
Other tips people would like to share?
I just wonder sometimes as educators if we're having a conversation with our students and asking them, what is it or why you're not coming and seeing how we can maybe make a plan with them. Because I know even in my classes when students weren't coming, sometimes there was a reason. And I teach one of those classes that students don't want to come to. You know, math is not everybody's favorite subject. So, what is it I can do to help you be successful in this class? And so, if maybe I'm not having that conversation with them, I'm not understanding what it is that's getting them to call mom and dad to come get them or have them hide, outside the whatever it is. So maybe it's also our gen ed teachers that need to step in, and gen ed, special ed, whatever teachers that need to step in and just start talking to some of our teachers, and that's secondary or elementary. But what can I do as a teacher to engage with the student to make them want to be in the classroom?
Thanks, Brooke. Very good ideas. Hard to believe that some kids don't love math, but they are out there. All right, thanks everyone for participating. Let's carry on. So we'll go through one more category and then we'll take a break. So suspensions is next. And our curiosity question is suspension rates have increased ever so slightly since 21-22. Will they continue to increase or are they leveling off? Let's take a look at the data here. All right, so this shows the percentage of students with disabilities who were suspended 1 or more days. So a low threshold here. In 21-22, it was 3.68%. Now it's 4.77%. So increased by 1 percentage point, not a big increase. And also, in terms of, I've analyzed this data for other states, and Utah has one of the lowest suspension rates that I've seen for the states I'm analyzing. Now, I often hear that suspension data is underreported, but even given that, taking that into account, you do have a low suspension rate. Hopefully that's a real low suspension rate. If we look at 3 days or more suspension, very low rates here. It's gone from 1.47% of students with disabilities in 21-22 to 1.89% 24-25. So other states I work with, this is often around 4 or 5%. So you are lower than your neighboring states. If we compare charters to districts, we can see that charters have a higher suspension rate. This is for 1 or more days, and that it's increased a little bit. Similar pattern for districts, except they're at a lower rate. So across all districts, 3.4% of students with disabilities were suspended 1 or more day in 24-25, compared to 5.5% for charters. If we look at the range by district, not as large of a range as we saw with attendance. So for districts, there's lots of districts that have a 0% rate. And then the highest district was suspending 8.8% of its students with disabilities. For charters, lots of charters with 0% rates. And then one charter was suspending 32% of its students with disabilities for 1 or more days. And then this shows for the 3-day range. So similar pattern, charters have a higher rate of suspension than districts for the 3 or more days. And then we see some variability across districts and charters, although not very much. So the highest at the district was 5% of students with disabilities being suspended 3 or more days. 16% was the highest rate for charters. Here we break it out by grade group because we do know that it varies by grade group. So kids in the middle school grades are more likely to be suspended for 1 day as well as for 3 days, followed by kids in grades 9 through 12. This shows the disaggregations, and this is for 1 or more days. So what stands out is those kids with an emotional disability, behavioral disorder. 23% of these kids were suspended 1 or more days. Followed by that, it would be kids with OHI at 8%. For environments, we see some variability. So kids in the V2 environment, 7% of them were suspended versus 4% in the V1. By race ethnicity, we see some variability, not a lot, 7% of Native Americans, followed by 6% of Hispanics, And then male students with disabilities are twice as likely to be suspended than females. So if we go back to the Padlet, so over here, this is report 4. So indicator 4 has to do with suspension, and indicator 4 has to do with kids suspended for more than 10 days. But in Utah, that's such a low number. That's why I look at the 1 and 3 days. And so once you scroll past that, then you will find your big picture report for the 1 or more days, which will show the trend as well as the disaggregations we talked about. And then if you keep scrolling, you'll get to the 3 or more days, the big picture report. And then I guess that's it. So 10 pages of statistical goodness for that. And then in terms of the whiteboards, if you go to whiteboard number 8, some of you are already writing, love it. So we're whiteboards 8 and 9. So I'll go ahead, I'll check in 15 minutes, probably give you a total of 20 minutes. Then we'll come back, talk about the data, and then we'll take a break. So I will check in at 10 after 2. Take 2 more minutes to finish up your thoughts, and I'll call you back together. Okay, thanks for all your great comments, both on this slide as well as the what, so what in terms of looking at your own data. So really lots of good ideas here. Would anyone like to comment on theirs or another idea or additional thoughts? Well, all great thoughts. So why don't we go ahead and take a break? So those of you who are still writing, you can keep on writing. Let's see, it's 2:10, so come back at 2:25 and we will pick up with LRE. So 2:25.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, it is 2:25. I hope you were all revived from your 15-minute break and are ready to tackle some more data. So I hope everyone's back. Okay, Laura Lee gave me the thumbs up, so I'm going to keep going.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
All right, let's start with LRE for K-12. And our curiosity question surrounding indicator 5 is indicator 5 performance is very strong, yet this improvement is not translating into increased proficiency. So while maintaining placement in 5A remains important, of course, it raises a critical question. Why aren't stronger inclusion rates leading to better academic outcomes for students with disabilities? So let's take a look at the data. Now, we won't really be sharing proficiency rate data on these slides. That'll come a few slides further, but just keep in mind that proficiency rates are pretty flat, while indicator 5A, inclusion in the regular ed classroom at least 80% of the time, continues to go up. All right, this chart here shows the percentage of kids in a given environment in fall 2024. So 75.1% are in the V1 environment, very high rate, very good, solid rate. 14% are in the V2 rate, often called the resource room. I don't think Utah uses the term, but they're in the regular education environment between 40 and 79% of the time. 8% are in the V3 rate, and then 2.9% are in all other environments, such as homebound, hospital, residential facilities, separate schools. If we look at it over time, since fall 2019, your rate has gone from 67.3% of students with disabilities in the V1 rate to 75.1%. If we go back further in time, another 10 years, it'd be even lower. So we see really a dramatic increase in the V1 rate over time. If something goes up, that means something else must go down. And so we can see for the V2 rate, it has decreased from 21%, and now it's 15.8%. And then the V3 rate has gone from 9% to 8%. If we look at it by charter and district status, so district rates have gone from 70.1% in 21-22 to 73.6%. The V1 rate in the charters is higher than what we see in the districts. But keep in mind, from a few slides ago, we did note that the districts are more likely to have students with some of the more involved disability categories. So that might be what is explaining this. But the charter rate has gone from 84.3% to 85.9%. We do see variability by districts and charters. So for districts, there's one district that has 60.6% of its students with disabilities in the V1 rate, and another 97.3%. For charters, it ranges from 52.3% to 91.1%. So interesting variability on that. If we look at it by grade level, the lower the grade, the more likely the student is going to be in the V1 rate. So on K2, 80.8% of kids are in the V1 rate, and this decreases to grades 9 through 12, or 64.3% are in the V1 rate. If we disaggregate it by our typical categories, we can see males are less likely than females to be in the V1 rate. And Hispanics are less likely than the other groups to be in V1. Students with autism are the least likely, followed by students with the behavioral emotional disordered. Kids with speech language impairment are most likely to be in the V1 rate. So interesting disaggregations there. So now let's go to our Padlet. So the reports we'll be looking at are the indicator 5 reports. So if we look at the state, and of course you have your corresponding report, the first one is the big picture report, which shows many of the slides I just many of the slides I just shared. The current slides, as well as results over time, and then the disaggregated data. Then we show the 5B rate. So for indicator 5, we have 5A, and then we have 5B, which corresponds to your V3 rate. So you'll see the same disaggregations. I didn't focus on it in my PowerPoint, but just know you can look at it for your own LEA. 5C, indicator 5C looks at kids in residential facilities, separate school, homebound hospital. And so for Utah, that's 2.32% of all students with disabilities, a very low rate. Same disaggregations. Then we can see it by grade level, by individual grade level, by disability category, and then results over time. And then it breaks it out by grade group. So lots to look at for this one, 21 pages. And so after you've had a chance to reflect on the state data, on your data, go to the whiteboard number 10. Here's our curiosity that I opened up this section with. We'd love to hear your comments on this, as well as go ahead and write down some of your thoughts surrounding your own data. So let's go ahead and take 15 minutes on this one. So go ahead, I'll call you back at 2:46. Thank you. Take 2 more minutes to finish recording your thoughts. All right. As always, thanks for the great comments on our curiosity question, as well as I see a few comments over here on LEA data. Would anyone like to comment on any of these post-its or an additional comment? Okay, well, let's keep going then. All right. For pre-K LRE, I'm going to talk about it, but we're not going to do the whiteboard activity in the interest of time, but I just wanted to present some data to you. It's not that we think our pre-K kids don't deserve the same amount of attention, but we are short on time. So this is the slide on the percent of pre-K students with disabilities who are placed in a given environment. And so A1, B1, that's the indicator 6A rate. So they're attending a regular early childhood program and receiving their services in that regular early childhood program. Most recently, it's about 47%. And then the C1, C2, C3 rate is the indicator 6B rate. So they're attending a separate classroom, separate school, separate facility, 35.3%. If we look at data over time, the 6A rate has decreased slightly from 52.1% in 1920 to 46.9%. So that's the opposite direction we want that to go. We want that to increase. We want the 6B rate, the kids in the separate classrooms, separate schools, to decrease, but you can see that it has increased slightly to 35.3%. So we see the trends going in the opposite directions of what we would like. And so that was the question we were going to have you comment on. So feel free after the webinar, you can always go back to the whiteboards. The whiteboards will be available till Monday for you to comment on, but just putting that thought in your head, which wasn't a very good thought. So let me give you some good thoughts to think about. So let's talk about the state test. First, participation. Now, I framed this negatively. I shouldn't. So my framing is participation rates continue to be below 95%. What can you do to improve? But if we look at the grade 9 through 12 participation rate, it has increased dramatically. I should have led with that. So all of you who have grade 9 through 12 students with disabilities in your LEA, thank you for getting this rate up. So, and it's also increased a little bit for grades 6 to 8 from 87% to 89%, and it's leveled out for grades 3 to 5. Now, nationally, we're required to get it at that 95% rate. So that's why, we still want it to get higher. but it has increased for these lower grades. This is reading, and we see a similar pattern for math as well. So keep up the good work in terms of increasing participation rate. I know when you are an opt-out state and parents decide to opt out, your hands are tied in many ways. And in terms of the results by charters and districts, they're similar. So districts have a slightly higher participation rate than charters for both reading and math. We do see some variability. So if we look at the reading participation rates for districts, there's one district where 76.8% of its students participated, another 97.1%. For charters, there was one where 31.9% participated, another 100%. So great variability on that. If we look at the disaggregations in terms of who's least likely to participate in reading, it's our BD/ED students, 80% there, and our kids who have low attendance. So no surprise there, if they're not attending, they probably don't want to attend and participate in the state test. Also, kids in the V2 environment are less likely to participate than kids in the V1 environment. And similar patterns for math. And you do have
Susan, I do think one of the comments Emily Nordfelt made in the chat that opt-out is not the only reason why student counts are non-participants. It's the main one, but we also know there's absenteeism and unknown reasons that they are not doing these tests.
That is such a good lead in to this slide right here.
Perfect.
So I want to point out that you have a report, it's QL3A. So if you download your indicator 3 bundle, it might have, I'm just guessing, maybe it has 50 pages, 70 pages, but if you search for QL3A, you will get to the report that shows the reasons for non-participation by grade level. So statewide, for example, there were 575 grade 3 students who did not participate. 25 of them were absent, 168 parental opt-out, 48 participant code, but no test for some reason, 318 unknown. So definitely take a look at this for your own LEA, and it should provide lots of insight as to what is potentially going on at your LEA, and then what kind of strategies you can come up with to tackle that. All right, but let's move on to proficiency. So we're going to talk about indicator 3B, which is the reading and math proficiency rates on the regular state assessment. And our question here is related to what we talked about for indicator 5. Proficiency rates have remained largely stagnant with only minimal gains for grades 9 through 10 reading. What factors are contributing to this lack of progress? And I have a note to myself, add to whiteboard. I could have taken the note off because I did add it to the whiteboard, but you will see that in a moment. But let's look at the trends over time. So this is reading over time. The green line is grades 3 to 5. So we can see in spring 21, 18%. Since then, it's been pretty flat, right around 21% proficiency rate for reading. For grades 6 to 8, it has gone up a little bit from 10 to 12%, but nothing to write home about. And 9 to 12, grades 9 through 12 for reading has gone from 8% to 11% most recently. So it was flat. We did have an increase in 2025. Hopefully that will stay or continue going up. If we look at math, we had 22% in spring 21. So it has gone up a little bit, but it's leveled out the past 3 years. Same with grades 6 to 8. It's gone from 9% to 11%, but pretty flat the last 3 years. And grades 9 through 12, if we look at the whole trend line, it's a flat line, although 2025 was higher than the others. But all in all, the trend lines are flat. If we look at it by LEA type, So green is charter, yellow is district. We can see that the charter schools are slightly higher, their proficiency rates, than the district for reading. And then for math, you're really very similar, no difference. We do see some variability. This should have been from 50 to 70%, this from 0 to 30% for reading. For math, we have 0 to 50%. So there's at least one district that has a 0% proficiency rate, another that has a 50%. So it might be interesting to see what is this district doing that is getting a 50% proficiency rate for students with disabilities. For charters, we also see great variability, 31.9% for the lowest and 100% for the highest. And I only included LEAs in the ranges if they have at least 20 students with disabilities. 20 is pretty small, but if you have at least 100% of them scoring proficient, that is good. So we do see some bright spots in the state in terms of their proficiency rates. If we disaggregate the data, this shows across all grade groups. Then we can see that the multiracial students had the highest proficiency rates. Males were higher than females, and kids with speech language were the highest. SLD kids had the lowest proficiency rates. Kids in the V1 environment were much higher than kids in the V2 environment, and attendance is correlated with proficiency. Makes sense. If you're not in school, you're not learning the material, and you're going to score lower than kids who are attending all the time. Then the next few slides just disaggregate it by grade group. So the best predictor of proficiency is how did you score on the previous year test? So a previous year test has a very strong relationship with future tests proficiency rates. Other than that, the next best predictor is primary disability code, grade group, and environment. So that's why broke these out by grade group, just to see for grades 3 to 5 kids with speech language had the highest proficiency rate, and males were higher than females, V1 higher than V2. Grades 6 to 8, similar pattern other than the gender thing. So we see kids' speech language have the highest, SLD lowest, and V1 higher than V2. Grade 9 to 12. Here we see that students with autism are approaching kids with CD, speech language, as well as the ED kids have a pretty high proficiency rate, but SLD kids continue to have a low proficiency rate, and environment still predicts proficiency as well. If we look at math overall, we're going to see the same patterns. Kids with speech language, highest, SLD lowest, V1 highest, V2 lowest, and a relationship with attendance. Just more reason to get that attendance rate up because we see positive outcomes related to attendance. Males higher than females. Grades 3 to 5, similar pattern. Speech language the highest, SLD the lowest, V1 the highest, V2 the lowest. Grade 6 to 8, same pattern. So the proficiency rate, the absolute level may be different, but we see similar patterns. And ditto with 9-12. Okay, so let's go back to the Padlet. And we are on number 14. Good, I like people who are proactive. All right, so you can address this curiosity question as well as look at your own data. Oh, I forgot to mention, so the reports you'll want to look at are indicator 3. And indicator 3, there's 88 pages. I was guessing 50, 70. It's a lot of data. So you have your snapshot reports on the indicators themselves. So 3A, B, C, D are by grade level, grade 4, grade 8, grade 9, and 10 together, high school. So look at your snapshots. And then you will get to your big picture for 3A. I want to get to the big picture for, oh, that did not work for some reason. So here's your quick look report 3A, which I mentioned before, that had the reasons for non-participation. And eventually, if you scroll down far enough, these are all 3A. You'll get to 3B, which is proficiency on the state test. So starting on page 30 is 3B, and then you'll get to the big picture reports, which provide lots of details about how your students are performing on the regular state test. So be sure to look at those and then start answering the curiosity question as well as your LEA question. So let's see, there's a lot to look at here. So let's go ahead and give you 20 minutes. So I'll call you back at 3:20. Go for it. 2 more minutes to finish your thoughts. Okay, as always, great comments. So a couple I noticed over here I think are good ideas is identifying those LEAs with high proficiency rates and seeing what can be learned from them. So that's possibly something USBE could do and share. And following a cohort of students, the researcher in me really likes that suggestion as well. But all your ideas are great. Would anyone like to comment on these, or does anyone have any other thoughts you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, I have one. So that sticky that says, I wonder why our gen ed proficiency rates are also low. Um, so I don't remember the exact number or who it was presented by, but I remember seeing a presentation about our test design, and it's designed to be rigorous. And so it's not designed for s- the state to ever have 100% proficiency. If we reached 100% proficiency, our test isn't rigorous enough. And so it's designed that if we're doing really well as a state on the test, our proficiency rate as a state is it's gonna there's some number that we would reach, but it's not 100%. So that's something to keep in mind as you look at proficiency rates that I wish I knew the number. I'll see if I can find it, but the the test is not designed for the state to have 100% proficiency.
Thanks, Malia, for that context. That is real important to know. What is a reasonable upper limit? So you think about like when you take a driver's license test, those are designed to where like 85, 90% of people will pass them. This is totally different where it's a considerably lower percent. Okay. What other comments do people have? All right, let's carry on.
I have a
Go ahead.
comment. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody on this call is aware, but one of the concerns that a lot of people around the state have expressed for several years for the ninth and 10th grade assessment for Utah Aspire Plus is it is a test that measures, well, it's grade based and not course based, which is different than our RISE assessment for 3 through 8, and also gives that ACT predictive score. However, this spring is the last administration of Utah Aspire Plus. And starting in the spring of 2027, RISE will be the assessment that is delivered to all students in 3 through 10th grade, which is going to be course based and not grade based. So just kind of food for thought on looking ahead at how that might shift some of our data and what those gains could hopefully show a positive growth for students.
Okay, thank you for that information. Good to know.
Do we expect that the 9-10 test will produce higher proficiencies then? because they're based on course?
Oh, I
Nikki,
could
we're
not at all
having
make that
trouble hearing you.
prediction. Yeah, I'm not saying that at all. It'll just be something to look into in the future. There's going to be a shift in that data, and we don't know what that's going to look like until our students complete testing.
Yeah, back when we used to test in high school based on the course that the student took, it really varied a lot across courses. So students tended to have higher proficiency rates in biology than chemistry, for example. So it might go back to that. It might just be not a grade level thing, but depending on which course. And then something else, Tracy's comment, LEAs want to make sure students with disabilities are enrolled in test triggering courses. We will probably take a hit on our participation rates in ninth and 10th grade, well, all high school grade levels, just because the a lot of ninth grade, a lot of kiddos don't take math all 3 years. That we see a lot of students with disabilities take their ninth grade language arts or their ninth grade, the secondary math one, they take it in 10th grade rather than in ninth grade. And so since RISE is triggered by course enrollment, if they don't have a course that would trigger a RISE test, then they're still expected to test, but they're not going to have a test. And so they'll be a non-participant for that unknown reason. And so we really need to make sure that kiddos are getting enrolled in test triggering courses in all of the grade levels 9, 10. Will RISE go up to grade 11 for, no, so just ninth and 10th. Yeah, so ninth and 10th, we'll need to be really diligent about that to not take a big hit on our proficiency rates or participation rates.
All right, thanks, Molly and Jessica, for what's coming up in the future. Any other comments about proficiency or the state test? Okay. And of course, there is the alternate assessment proficiency. We didn't discuss it in this webinar, but make sure you pay attention to your indicator 3C rates as well. All right, let's look at graduation and dropout. So the question here is graduation rates have plateaued, yet dropout rates continue to fall. Why aren't these trends moving together? Let's look at some data. So the green line shows the graduation rate over time. It was 69.9%. And since then, we'll discount this COVID year, that you can see that the graduation rate now is 66.8%, 3 percentage points lower than it had been. And the dropout rate has gone from 23.6% to 17.1%. So we're seeing a nice trend for dropout, but we wish we would see a corresponding increase for graduation. If we look at it by LEA type, we can see that charter schools have a higher graduation rate, 80.8% most recently in 24-25, higher than districts, which is at 65.2%. If we look at the range by district, it ranges from 73.9% to 91.4%, and charters 58.3% to 100%. So we are seeing some variability by districts and charters. This shows the dropout rates. So districts have a higher dropout rate than charters. Most recently, 17.8% of students with disabilities in districts dropped out, compared to 10.6% of students with disabilities in charters. And we can see great variability by district and charters. So there's at least one district that has a 0% dropout rate. The highest dropout rate is 52.6%. Charters, several have a 0% rate. And then the highest for charters is 38.9% dropout rate. If we look at the disaggregated data by group, we can see that females are slightly more likely to graduate than males. We have Native Americans have the highest graduation rate, which is interesting. We've seen some slides previously where Native Americans had a higher negative outcome. And the number is relatively small, but still large enough to say good job on the graduation rate. Hispanics have the lowest graduation rate at 65%. Kids with behavioral emotional disorder, 53% graduation, followed by students with autism, 58%. Kids with speech language had the highest graduation rate. And like we've seen with proficiency, kids in the V1 environment have a higher positive outcome compared to kids in the V2 environment. And graduation relates to attendance, except for this group here. So kids with the highest attendance rates, between 95 and 100%, they're less likely to graduate than kids with lower attendance. I see this with every single state I do this analysis. And usually when we dig into the data, it's because this group has some unique kids, like kids with a cognitive delay. Often they have very high attendance and they're less likely to get a regular diploma. So it's some of that going on, as well as potentially some of the kids in court-based placements. Dropouts, we see similar patterns, just the reverse. So I'll start with attendance. If your attendance is lower than 70%, 59% of these kids drop out. So low attendance, really low attendance, is a good predictor of dropping out. Kids with BD-ED disability, 42% of them drop out. And then other than that, similarly to what we saw with graduation, Hispanics are most likely to drop out, whites least likely. Kids in the V2 environment are more likely to drop out than kids in the V1 environment. And this just shows the number of students who dropped out by grade level. So if we look at your data, there were 22 kids in grade 8 who dropped out in the 24-25 school year, 80 grade 9, all the way up to 466 in grade 12. So the most kids drop out when they're in grade 12, which I think is always interesting. They're close to the finish line. Other than I have no way of knowing how many of these were close in terms of credits, but they were close in terms of the grade level. So let's look at our Padlet. So we're almost to the end. So if you go to number 16, here's our curiosity questions about graduation rates plateauing, but dropout rates continue to fall. And then 17 is about looking at your own data. If we go to the reports, so it's this indicator 1 and 2 reports, which I pointed out way back at the beginning. So you have your big picture report, which shows the same type of overtime results and disaggregations that I just went over. And then down at the bottom would have the group performance over time. So go ahead and take a look at those reports. Let's look for 15 minutes. So at 3:47, I will call you back together. Let's take 2 more minutes to record your final thoughts, and then I'll call you back together. All right. Thanks for all your comments. Would anyone like to speak up about these or any other comments surrounding graduation and dropout?
Yeah, I have some thoughts about that post-it note on the right. My understanding is that graduation and dropout are not measured the same. Could that explain the discrepancy? So these are indicator 1 and 2, which is
Correct.
the rate of students exiting among students age 14 through 21 who exit special ed, what percent of them exit by graduating or dropping out. And so we have to keep that in mind, that it's a weird um, exiter measure compared with what people mostly think of when they think of graduation, which is the cohort graduation rate. Um, so yeah, so this rate, the so the question, could that explain the discrepancy though? So yeah, in thinking about that, so graduation rates remaining stable over time, but dropout rates going down. We've done a lot of work around data on that and working with LEAs to know how to update their data to not have a student show up as a dropout because of a data error. And so as that dropout rate's going down, some of that is just that the data is cleaner and it's actually coming closer to being more reflective of what the age 14 through 21 event dropout rate actually is, whereas when it used to be in the 20 something percent, a lot of that was inflated by data errors. Um, Whereas the graduation data, people are usually really good about making sure graduation data is accurate and people know that data item very well. So we haven't necessarily seen an improvement in that rate because of data improvements. So that would definitely be a discrepancy between the two, that would explain a little bit of why we've seen one move and not the other move. But also, the graduation rate is it's also uh, kept low because this data set has students, super seniors, retained seniors who end up aging out, who end up earning a certificate of completion, earning that alternate diploma, which does not count as a graduate in the indicator one rate. So we have things going on that are keeping this rate from ever being able to so that when we see in graduation and dropout rates, we want to see graduation and dropout equal to 100%, right? But they never do because there's always that other exeter reason that's going on. So we have the other completers, the continuing students, the age out kiddos. And so with indicator one, we get more of that than we do with the cohort rate because the retained seniors are more likely to exit with the certificate of completion or age out than someone in their cohort year. So just some thoughts that post-it note triggered for me.
Well, good. Thank you for that additional information.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? And I did want to point out, let me see if it's on here. So your snapshot one report, what Malia was talking about, you have your dropout, you graduated with a regular high school diploma, and then you have graduated with the alternate diploma, reached maximum age, received a certificate. So be sure to look at those percentages for your LEA to see how they have changed over time and if they're impacting your graduation rate. We can argue all of these things are good, but of course, indicator one focuses on that graduation rate with a regular high school diploma. Okay, we are on the home stretch here. Bear with me. We have one more topic area to discuss, and then we'll close up with one final activity. So let's talk about ESY. And so I've been generating an ESY extended school year service report for several years. And I don't know to what extent anyone's looking at it, just because I'm not there on Utah soil hearing from the LEAs. Hopefully you're listening to it. But Laura Lee and Malia thought it'd be good to mention it. And, nationally, ESY is frequently under-identified for students with disabilities for whatever reason. And so I think it is a topic that should be given more attention. Also, sometimes ESY is identified for a student, but the parent refuses ESY services. And we know that's not a good thing. And then lastly, what I want to say nationally, what's going on is that ESY is often a litigation trigger, that if a student isn't getting ESY and needs ESY for FAPE to occur, it can result in litigation or complaints. I don't know the number of complaint investigations in Utah, but I know several surrounding states that they've seen a big increase in complaints by parents. So it's just one thing that is important to consider. So let's just we have a few slides we want to share just to kind of get a handle on ESY. And our question though is what specific data analyses would increase our understanding of the use and impact of ESY services on student outcomes? So this shows the percent receiving ESY by grade group. You can see that grades K through 2 are the most likely to receive ESY, 4.6%, and then it decreases to 3.2% in grades 9 through 12. Interesting pattern. If we look at it by environment, so kids in the V3 environment and other environments, so this would be the residential facilities, the separate schools, the homebound hospital placement, they are the most likely. So about 1/4 of these students receive ESY compared to 16.9% of V3 kids. If we look at it just in the V3 environment, so since it's so strongly related to environment, we wanted to focus just on the V3 environment since more kids are here than here. Then we can see that 21.7% of students with autism get ESY in the V3 environment. 25.3% of kids with multiple disabilities get ESY in the V3 environment. Least likely are the kids with OHI and kids with a cognitive delay. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry. Thinking of another state, CD, speech language impairment. ID is your intellectual disability, cognitive delay. Then here is the other environments. So the separate schools, residential facilities. So here, kids with DD, 54.7% and are getting ESY. Multiple disabilities, 40.6% are getting ESY. So just some interesting patterns by disability that since we haven't drilled down, dug deeper in this data, it's hard to know really what's going on, at least from my perspective. You out in the field may know exactly what's happening here. So if we go back to the Padlet, oops, hold on here. And so this report, the ESY is in X4 services. And so you'll see some of the same charts that in fact, these are the exact charts I just shared, snapshot 1, report. And then you have it broken out by grade group or K-12 for the by environment. So not a lot of data on ESY. That's why we thought it might be helpful to ask you if there's some interesting critical data analyses that would increase your understanding of the use and impact of ESY. So let's take 10 minutes to look at your ESY data and reflect on this question. So whiteboard number 18, whiteboard 19, if you want to comment on your own ESY results. So 10 minutes. I'll call you back at 4:05. Take 2 more minutes to record any thoughts you have. Okay, thank you, everyone. I see a comment from Jerry in the chat asking me about, is Utah data typical of what I see elsewhere? I will get back to you on that. I don't analyze, I analyze the ESY data. I don't pay a lot of attention to it to any state. So I will get back to Laura Lee with those statistics and let you know. Other comments that people would like to make about ESY?
So, Susan, this is Tracy. So I just wanted to throw it out there too to remind folks that ESY is something that any student with a disability may possibly qualify for and be in need of. So it's not just for students with the most significant cognitive disability. So I sometimes get that question from the field.
Thanks, Tracy. Other comments?
Just in general, I think we struggle with the data quality for ESY data. I've seen big districts report some students with ESY one year and then 0 the next year. And so, yeah, might need to do some training on that, especially if we're going to be able to start using it to do some analyses.
Yeah, that's the thing. Once you start paying attention to some data element, it usually gets cleaned up or changed or at least talked about.
Yeah.
Oh. Any other thoughts? All right, I have just a couple more slides to share with you. All right, I want to remind you that, 3.5 hours, almost 4 hours ago, I mentioned that today wasn't just going to be a fun data and then we'd go off and never think about this again. So I want to remind you of some potential next steps at your LEA. So the what, get your data reports, bring the right people to the table back at your LEA, go through your data reports. The so what, identify 2 to 3 key insights, what's working, what's not, why it matters. And the now what, define concrete next steps, who will do what by when, and follow through that problem solving model. And remember to download your how to use your data reports 2-page infographic. Use that as a guide. I think it's an easy way to think about your data and how to process it. And so I'm hoping that most of you had an aha moment. So I'd like you to just take 5 minutes to go back to the last whiteboard. Let's get there. Not that one. And write down an important insight you learned from today and or a specific action you will take in your LEA in the next 30 days. So we'll just take 5 minutes and then wrap this up. Take 2 more minutes to write down your last thoughts. Well, you didn't disappoint me on the last whiteboard. Lots of good thoughts again. Want to call out just a couple. This one, as much as I hate to admit it, yes, sometimes the data doesn't hold all the answers. They hold a lot of answers, but not all of them. And so part of the reason why it's up to you to figure out that so what, now what, and talk to others to figure out what is the answer at your LEA. And then someone over here, it's moving around, mentioned to celebrate the gains as well as determining areas of challenge. This PowerPoint, as you figured out, pointed out a lot of things that were curious, maybe not as good as they should be, but a lot of things are going very well in Utah. And so there are reasons to celebrate as well, even though I might not have highlighted those. What else? Laura Lee, Malia, they helped me with this. I need to call out Malia, thanking her for sending me all the data and always helping me interpret the data. Every state has unique data elements, and Malia is very great at providing all the data to me. So Malia, Laura Lee, anyone else, would you like to comment on anything?
I will just say thank you for being here. This has been really insightful for me. We'd love your feedback. I just put a survey in the chat if you can take a minute to fill that out. We'd love to hear from you. Malia, do you have anything?
I just want to say that the comments on all the whiteboard comments have been great. Some of the wonders that Susan put in the slideshow were things that I specifically wondered about. So I've been eagerly watching comments and feedback and seeing and yeah, some really great helpful comments here. Thank you.
Absolutely. I will type up the comments on Monday. So if any of you want to keep writing comments, you have until Monday to do so. And if you can't sleep some night, come to the whiteboard, look at a few reports, add a few comments. Anything else for the good of the order?
Thank you for your time, Susan. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it. Well, thank all of you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for your attention and all your good insights into the data.
Julicia, did you have a question? Well, maybe not.
Nope, sorry, we're good.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Laura Lee, would you like me to stay for a while and debrief? Are you going to have a debrief?
Actually, maybe let's set up a debrief after. Is that okay? I can set
Sure,
up a time for us to meet later.
sure.
Unless it would be better to meet now. You tell me what works better for you.
Yeah, well, I'm available sometime tomorrow. Next week, I'm traveling. So I don't know, maybe we should just take a few minutes now if you all have time for that. Okay,
That should work.
okay.
Um,
I know it's been a long day. Probably
oh,
already
it's fine. It's
leave your
just fine.
desk like, don't want to sit here another minute.
Is the recording off, Ellen?
I'm doing that right now.
Okay. And then
One sec.